Hey, Andrew, thanks for being on the show.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to start with the first question I ask everybody. What do you do, Andrew?
What do I do? I do a lot of things. I kind of manically run around my office and my part of New York City asking people what the highest leverage thing I could be doing to unblock them in their life is, and then trying to do that as quickly as possible and then move on to the next thing. The idea is like if you do this enough, you get to live through a golden age. If you don't do it enough, then um, you're sad. No, I don't know. I mean, I love my life. My life's awesome. Lately, to be more specific, I am helping people who would like to break into the tech industry break into the tech industry. Feels like that ball kind of got dropped by boot camps who continued to degrade their quality year after year until boot camp grads are now just like despised and like nobody wants to hire a boot camp grad. You're like practically a lemon. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to be offensive. There are definitely good boot camps out there, and if you're a boot camp student, you should stick with it. Definitely, like you can code. I know you can code. You can do this. But also, if you had a bad boot camp experience, yeah, that sucks. And it definitely is possible to become very technically proficient within 3 months, but it requires a level of focus, dedication, hard work, and pain and suffering that uh, you need an entire community to help you push through, honestly. Because on the other side of that pain and suffering is catharsis. Like, it feels amazing to work so hard, but it can definitely be frustrating when you're learning.
That is one heck of an answer. I mean, I thought it was going to start with, I guess I'm running a new kind of educational community. But I think the way you've approached the problem, which really is what everybody in their lives should be doing, is like, what is the highest leverage thing I could do for the highest leverage person in my community, and literally just relentlessly go after that. I think that's such a good answer. I might just steal that from you. Um,
Yeah, it is very local first. I do want to help my friends specifically. Like I think my friends are great, and also if I don't help them, who will? And everybody needs help. Right? We can't
yeah.
only help the best people or the like most important people, quote unquote, or whatever.
Yeah. And you touched on I think a really, I think broader theme than I expected to get into this early, but there's a few layers there I want to unpack with you. There's first of all the tech industry as an entity in the world that has, like a bunch of humans in it that behave in certain ways, and sort of like the esoteric keywords that people in the tech industry use to describe the tools that they use and the methodologies they use and things like that. Um, and then there's another layer, which is the impact of technology on a person, right? Not just as
Mhm.
a consumer of technology, but the impact that you can have if you are sort of literate in these tools. So why don't we start with that? And I want to ask you, how did you pick this to be the problem that you're trying to solve, like helping people break into the tech industry?
Great question. So I do solve other problems. You know, I'm raising my 3 month old, and we're solving a big co-living problem in New York, which is like how do you co-locate with people that inspire you every day, who you can talk to every day, you see every day. Basically, how can we create dense, walkable neighborhoods where we knock on all the neighbors who are pre-existing, and also when new units come in, help our friends move into our neighborhood rather than living so far away from each other. So I work on that problem, and also we have a community college where we teach like over 30 classes across a variety of disciplines. So that's arts, dance. There was a motorcycle repair class, electronics. We do all sorts of things. Um, but my main focus, my main job, what I do every day is this boot camp. So anyway, on the one hand, I'd say it's not the only thing I do, and on the other hand, I'd say it's my favorite thing. Like, how did I decide? I don't. It's so obvious in a sense. I love it. It's my career. I have always been fascinated by technology. As soon as I started being able to tinker with it. Also, when I was in school, I took computer science classes, and they were the most fun I'd ever had learning. They were the most fun I'd ever had reading books. Um, I just really have always fallen in love with computers my whole life. So it just makes a lot of sense that I should be spending a pretty substantial amount of my time teaching people about them if I'm going to be teaching at all. It's the thing I'm most qualified to teach.
Mm. Well, and I mean, I subscribe to that idea. I mean, I think it's hard to find a higher leverage set of skills to build, especially as more of the world becomes digitized.
Yeah, we can also talk
Um,
about that. So why this? not from my perspective. Like, I love it, so that's very convenient. But also, why this from my students' perspective? It's like, well,
Mhm.
it's a pretty good career. I'm gonna be honest. It's a pretty good career. If you work in the tech industry, you get like tech industry. I'm using scare quotes for those who are listening to this. Is a big bundle of people that are really just trying to build companies. You could honestly just call it like the new industry,
Mhm.
period. Every company is a tech company these days. And it's not totally true. Like you have mom and pop and you have local and you have small businesses and stuff. But any business that is trying to be an enterprise and is trying to be kind of um, category leader has to position itself as a tech company and has to grow as a tech company in a lot of cases. At least that's the norm. And so when we say tech industry, we're not actually still just referring to computers. We're kind of just referring to like a way of building businesses and starting businesses that involves moving very quickly, like pivoting very fast, using agile methodology, which is not a term that I like, but is often espoused, and hiring software engineers in order to automate processes internally and to move very quickly. So you have all these manufacturing companies and real estate companies and car companies, like Tesla, for instance, that hire um, hundreds or thousands of software engineers in order to operate more efficiently. So why, from my students' perspective, it's like, well, from within the tech industry, like if you know how to be a software engineer, you can kind of work on anything. You can work on biomedicine, or you can work on um, cars, or you can work on rockets, or you can, work on the guitar on it. You can work on music. Like you can work on literally everything. And then you tend to be one of the more higher paid people because you have a very valuable skill set. And also, you as a software engineer are often worth multiple headcount because you automate things that are part of your job description. So you kind of like every year that you're a productive member of the company, you should basically be automating away your own jobs or your own processes, which should presumably mean that you continue to pay for yourself.
Yeah, there's a compounding effect of the software engineer where you solve a problem once and you don't need to solve it again.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and like I think in this podcast we've had several conversations now around the value of computer science as a field and the beauty of programming and things of the sort. But one thing that stands out to me with Fractal is the approach that you're taking to building this organization, let's call it, and
Yeah.
the why don't we start by sort of outlining what the landscape looks like for getting the chops in this field,
Yeah.
whether it be like a classic formal education that you need to go to 4-year college, for instance, boot camps, which you sort of hinted at, and the dark turn they took, and then how you're approaching it. So I'd love to
Yeah.
hear like your analysis of the long the place in the world of CS as a major in college.
Right. And by the way, we can at any point hop to other education stuff if that interests you too. I can talk about liberal arts and I can talk about all the other classes that we do at Fractal U. And also I could talk about Montessori. Um, all of these are
Let's
things
do
that I have
all
some
of that.
expertise
Let's
in.
do all of that.
But to answer your question about bootcamp, like what's required? How do you contribute to this industry? And how can you make yourself expert quickly? Or not quickly. How can you make yourself expert? So I'm going to say some offensive things, potentially, but also inspiring in a way. Most people, this is a very unserious industry. I'm going to be totally honest. It's computer science and software is in many cases very unserious. There's a huge amount of money in it, and we saw this especially with, like, for instance, the dot-com bubble. Everyone knows that that was extremely unserious. You had pets.com blowing up, and then you have these massive crashes. And people were like, "Oh, the web is fake." No, the web is not fake. The web is extremely real. It has stuck around. Anybody who bet on the web being fake was totally wrong. So I am not saying software is fake. If you bet on software being fake, you are wrong, and you will continue to be wrong. But but is it serious the way that like mechanical engineering is serious or industrial engineering is serious or aerospace engineering is serious? um, Internally in every case, in a lot of cases, no. So what this means to me, like, why do I bring this up? You'll find just this massive variance in engineering quality in this field. And I'm sure maybe this is just me, it's like the wet streets cause rain effect or whatever, but maybe this is just my expertise where for me, I can evaluate software engineers and maybe doctors would say the same thing. Like, oh, the variance is insane among doctors. But it really, like, to me, there are people who say, oh, I can code. And then I'll give them an interview and they can't write FizzBuzz. And I've had students apply to my program. I told this anecdote a few times, but I've had students apply to my program who completed 4-year bachelor's of science degrees in computer science, 4 years of life studying this subject. And then I ask them to solve FizzBuzz, and they can't solve FizzBuzz. And by the way, for the readers, for the listeners, FizzBuzz is a very simple computer science program. It's basically a childhood counting game. You need to use what's called a for loop in order to iterate through 100 integers, 1 through 100. And every time you would print the integer, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But if it's a multiple of 3, you would print fizz. If it's a multiple of 5, you would print buzz. If it's a multiple of both, you print fizz and buzz. You'd print both. So that is a very simple program. It's actually
tragic.
It's so simple.
That is tragic.
Yeah. It's so simple that it was kind of invented in some ways people think as a joke, just to like kind of be a total smoke test of like, oh, is this person faking me? Are they scamming me, basically? And unfortunately, there are people who are not scamming. They just actually have spent 4 years studying something and not learning anything. How can this happen is kind of a different question that we can talk about. But I want to finish answering the question, which was, what does it take to be great? I'd say I just want to point out how easily it is to not be great. It's very easy to think you're learning about computers and to forget everything in one ear out the other, never really learn systematic computer science, and then just not be able to write FizzBuzz. So you can't do that. What do you have to do? Instead, you have to really practice, and you have to really like try hard the way that you would as an athlete, or the way that you would as artist, or the way that you would as a painter or a photographer or videographer or whatever, which is like you need to write hundreds or thousands of programs from scratch without help as an act of creative expression, and you need to judge your programs harshly. And that's it. It's really very simple. If you do this, you will be a great programmer, and if you don't, you won't ever be a good programmer. It's not like you can't pass tests, you can't memorize the facts. You can't this is a creative domain. It requires literacy. It's a domain of expression. You're expressing ideas, literally. And so in the same way that becoming good at mathematics is not about, although people mistake this, it's not about like being able to do your times table quickly. It's about in your head being able to imagine additions and imagine multiple. Like it is quite a remarkable thing that I can say, like, 7 times 106. Like I definitely don't know 7 times 106 off the top of my head, but taking a second, it's like 700, and then I do 7 times 6, and that's 42, so it's 742. And it's quite a remarkable thing that I'm able to do that, and that is not memorization. And you can imagine somebody who only believes that mathematics is memorization, who just gets to a high enough number, and then they're like, oh, I guess I just can't do math anymore. I think people maybe sometimes believe that computer science is a little bit like that. And that is definitely absolutely the wrong approach. You must practice.
I think that, well, the thing that you just did, you approached like a computer scientist. I mean, like it was, take the 106, split it into two things, 700, because I know that one's easy. And then, okay, I'd need to do a little bit more digging for 7 times 6, but that's not too bad. And then you just add them together. And sort of that little plan that you made, that to me is perfectly correlated with the CS education. Like this is how I'm going to approach a problem. And
But you can sense what, like, it isn't. I'm being creative when I do that. Some people I think don't believe me when I say this, or they don't realize it for themselves, and this is what it takes. It's like I am being creative. It's fun. Like you can throw a harder one at me, like 7 times 1,128, and like I would have so much fun over the next little bit using my body. It's not my brain. Like, yeah, sure, there's a lot of thinking, definitely. I'm not trying to say your brain's not important. I'm not trying to say like all the computation happens in my body. And it's not like dancing. It's a different thing than dancing. But also, there's a real sense in which the numbers start to break out in front of me, and I start to have a visual, somatic feeling of solving the math problem. And that is what made me like math. That's what made me good at math. Is I felt I could feel like I could tell what good was. If I solved the math problem good, then I felt good. The same way that if an artist draws a good painting, they feel good. And when a math problem was presented in front of me, like figuring out how to approach it, even if it's simple arithmetic, like we've been giving as examples, is this act of creative expression. And if you want to be, and it's the same with running. It's like you are going to think running is miserable if the thing that you focus on is the feeling in your body of like wanting to throw up or the feeling of like your muscles straining. It's like, why do people love running? Well, they love it because there is this like remarkable feeling of improvement over time sometimes. Maybe that's what they focus on. You can get this runner's high. You can like feel the strength through your body. And uh, in order to become great, in my opinion, in computer science, especially for people who aren't gifted, which typically means like you got it when you were young, you need to tap into that part of you, which is in all of us. Like, I don't believe there are necessarily types of learners or whatever. You need to tap into that part of you that really is capable of seeing computer science as a skill that you practice and you enjoy, and you take these incremental steps, and then you judge, did that feel good to me? Did like I enjoy what I did, and did I do a good job? And then you want to just crank that 1,000 times or whatever.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you, and I think the fact that what you're really learning is a way of thinking that is liberating, and you just
Right.
are you're putting yourself through challenges, and honestly, you're just getting. Well, oftentimes you get handed down challenges that people have already solved to know if you can get to the same insights that they got to. But
Right.
as soon as you graduate from sort of like an apprentice and you turn into a master, let's say, there are so many unsolved problems that you get to dedicate, those insights and your creativity to solving. So there's like so many unsolved questions in so many different fields that you could tackle with this way of thinking, and a very optimistic way of thinking too, because you're sort of like, you learn the fact that you can solve any problem. There are very like,
Right.
like there's a class of unsolvable problems, but like the space of solvable problems is so huge that you don't even need to worry about.
Right.
I want to do a little bit of devil's advocating just for
Yeah.
fun. Um, uh, so there is a component, I think, of CS education that is the reps of like,
Yeah.
having to implement more and more complicated problems.
Yeah.
There is another layer too of, I guess it's theory, or I guess
Theory.
it's like, like hyper distilled best practices, if you want to be sort of like stick to the practitioner realm.
Yeah.
um and those are hugely important, like
Yep.
learning. You're probably not gonna invent, Kruskal's algorithm when trying to solve a similar problem on your own. And so
Yeah.
learning, the higher levels of abstraction that have been created, including maybe to even identify which problems you can solve and which problems you can't. So
Yep.
how do you fit into these more theoretical concepts that aren't.
Yeah, like what's our theory? Like what theory do we teach? We definitely do teach theory for what it's worth. I just think
Or I guess my question is more,
yeah,
how do you embed theory into
right.
your very hands-on curriculum?
Yeah, it's a great question. The reason I focus on hands-on is not because I don't value theory at all, by the way. It's
Yeah.
because my educational inspiration is Montessori, and Montessori embeds theory into manipulables, into practical lessons. So basically, every lesson, every project, every action that you take is a theoretically grounded action. And obviously, you might make mistakes, and that's okay. Um, but then, that's what code review is for, and that's what asking questions is for, and that's what having a culture where everyone is focused on like really good theory is for. The reason that I don't like theory, or the reason that I focus on practice, is what I don't like is people thinking that talking about programming helps you learn. So I
Hmm.
totally believe that learning theory is what helps you become great, but I don't think that talking about theory helps you learn theory. which is tragic. It would be amazing.
That
So
would be
cool.
great.
It would be so cool if talking about theory helped us learn theory. And I don't mean it doesn't help at all. It's just like, how many times has somebody been like, yeah, but actually this algorithm, if you do it this way, is O of n log n. And you're just like, you start to sputter out and smoke's coming out of your ears. It just doesn't make any sense. But then when you run the for loop yourself, you're like, oh yeah, obviously this is stupid. Like, I could do it better. Um, but that's kind of like a somatic built understanding. So anyway, I think your question was almost a little bit more specific, which is like, what do you teach? So my belief is that it's not as important to understand how to quickly search and find um, elements in data structures. I don't think it's as important to quickly create new data structures, or to pop and push and pull things from data structures. I think what's really, really important, which, like, there's just a limited amount of theory I can teach in 12 weeks. I don't mean those things aren't important. They are. I have 12 weeks with people. So what do I prioritize? So when I do teach those things, when I do teach algorithms, I teach the best stuff I can. It's just, I don't spend that much time on it. What I really want people to hammer on is theory, like architectural theory. So how do you build really stable programs that retain their value over time, that are very easy to predict the outcome of the program, very easy to modify the program without breaking the whole structure, very easy to add new sections to the program without breaking the whole structure. So this is more about software engineering theory rather than computer science theory. And largely that's just because computer science, oftentimes if I had to like say a ratio of how many software engineers we need versus computer scientists in this way that I mean, we need like 10% computer scientists who are optimizing the most important algorithms that our society creates. And then we need like 90% software engineers who are making useful and structurally sound programs that can therefore be optimized. Because if you have a structurally sound program, you could take any particular piece and just go ahead and optimize it and then put it back in, and your program's still going to work just fine. So we teach mostly that. And then how do we do that? Well, for slightly more technical audience members, we teach, I'll try to stay pretty high level, but we teach a very strong data first functional programming perspective. So what we want you to do is we want you to first define your interfaces. So define your data types. What sort of data is going to show up in your application? That might mean like an entity relationship diagram, for instance, in a Postgres database, if we were talking about relational data. Then from there, once you know what your data is, it's so much easier to start thinking about, okay, well, how does that data flow through my application? And how do I create useful calculations without modifying the data in place, so that all parts of my application kind of know they have clean inputs and they have clean outputs? We call these pure functions. So we try to avoid in our program side effects as much as possible. We try to avoid parts of the program that like modify other parts of the program, because then it can become a kind of tangled mess. So we try to keep our lines really clean. And then we also use strong typing. So we teach full stack TypeScript. If students give me an any type or they give me a type assertion, I'm like, no, this is not good code. You gotta tell me what the type is. I gotta know. And there's a few tools we use to help with that as well.
Can you talk to me more about those tools? Like, what kind of
Yeah,
tools
so
do
we
you?
use Zod. Zod is like a schema parsing library. It's nice because
Right.
we teach full stack development. So we're teaching front end and
Hmm.
back end. The stack that we use is like, we're trying to give people jobs. Remember, I'm not necessarily endorsing
Yeah,
this as the
yeah,
best
yeah, yeah.
listed, but
I think.
the stack that we use is React, Next.js, Express.js. So we have Express on the back end. We have Next.js as a static site generator tool. I like Remix better personally, but we teach Next. And then we have React on the front end. This is all TypeScript. And so we share types across these repos. We tend to have a monorepo like structure with how we make the apps. Then Zod is nice because let's say I'm making an API request to my backend from my front end. Well, my front end is trying to get let's say it's Twitter clone. I'm trying to get all the tweets from my front end. Well, my backend has all the tweets and it knows the type of the tweets. And it sends over this strongly typed, like, this is definitely a tweet, I can promise you. And I know that every field like is filled or isn't filled. And you got a nice guarantee about that this is definitely a tweet. And then it goes over the wire, and the front end receives something that it thinks is probably a tweet. But then what if the developer on the backend application modifies that tweet to include a new field? Like they're changing the application pretty fast. They're iterating pretty fast. So now tweets have, what did Elon recently add? Impressions or whatever that need to be sent to the front end. And the front end is like, wait, but tweets don't have impressions. Like that's annoying. So how do we fix that? Well, we have this like type duplication where you have a type on the front end and a type on the back end. So we can fix that in a few different ways, but one tool that we use is Zod. Zod on the front end is going to let you parse that response you're getting from the server, and it's going to give you a type guarantee. And if the server gives you a wrong type, then your Zod parser is going to be like, hey, like I didn't receive the thing I expected. You can actually do better than that by integrating your front end and back end into the same repository and then sharing code on the service layers. You only need to write one service, and the service is shared between front end and back end, and it gets a type guarantee without any sort of assertion or parsing because it happens internally. There's a library called TRPC, typed RPC, does this, and there's another library called Zodios that can do this for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me a bit of like protocol buffers and something like that too. Also, I feel like I should get you to check out EdgeDB. It is a database that does all that for you. So you should check it out. I've been having a good time, and they have one of the coolest instructional documentation for any kind of software engineering thing I've seen before. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons role playing story.
Cool.
And it's like a book, and like you can follow along, and basically essentially what you're coding starts finishing the story, and it's very cool.
Yeah, I'll have to look into it. There's other tool, man. The TypeScript ecosystem is so good. It's unbelievable. It's like you can just do insanely powerful things so fast. We get to use all these AI models and stuff too, which is really fun. So we teach a bunch of that. But there's this new product that just came out called InstantDB, which is an open source library from a YC company. And they're like a real-time client-side database that uses CRDTs, which basically is a data structure. It stands for conflict-free replicated data type. Yeah, it's this data structure that basically allows you to get out of sync. So let's say we're both editing a Google Doc, but then my Wi-Fi goes out, so I'm editing the Google Doc, but I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi, and then I reconnect. Well, does Christian's Google Doc overwrite mine, and do I lose everything I wrote? Or does my Google Doc overwrite Christian's, and he loses everything he wrote? Well, the answer is neither. We can merge them, but how? Aren't there going to be merge conflicts? And so use a CRDT is a way of storing this data so that you never have a merge conflict. Merge conflicts aren't possible as long as you are using the CRDT spec correctly. So InstantDB is this almost like React state library. And instead of traditional React state, it's like a data store kind of like Redux, and it streams out all its everything it gets to all the other users of the InstantDB who are on that same room or topic, subscribed to the same room or topic that you're subscribed to. And then it gets responses from them. And if anybody goes offline, it uses the CRDT, and then it will reconnect with everybody else when it reconnects. So like it's almost like you have multiplayer websites in React state without having to build any multiplayer or socket features yourselves at all. And so it's so cool. It's getting so cool.
Reminds me a bit of like I used to follow the AutoMerge project, and there's this really cool decentralized database called Gun, I think. Also super fascinating. But similar ideas, like, and this must be like 3 or 4 years old now, but I've always been fascinated about data, replication and how to, and I think there's, which brings me to a second point. I think that one of the things that I'm very grateful for this day and age is that you start posting stuff on the internet and random people gravitate toward you, and you sort of find that you have a lot more in common. So this, I think, is like, this is exactly how we got to know each other. And like, you literally posted a link, and I was like, your tweets look cool. So like, we connected. And then it's fun to discover that there's all these layers of secondary, like within the wide spectrum of CS things, that we also gravitate towards similar, particularly useful things in.
I find that there's like an archetype of person, and there's this concept of teapot or like post-rat or whatever. Like there's this archetype of person who's drawn to like almost like intellectually interesting uh, ideas about how we communicate as a society. And I feel like we're all the same person. Like we all have the same personality.
Yep.
And every time I meet my, you might know Jeek on Twitter. Jeek and
No,
B.
actually.
Jeek is XIQ on Twitter, X Genesis also,
Mhm.
and yeah, he's just like us, same
Nice.
person.
A good person then.
Yeah, he's great.
Well, we did get a bit sidetracked. I mean, like we
Yes.
could, and I am tempted, but we
No,
could
no.
geek
Let's keep
out
talking
about
about
the tech
education.
stack. Yeah, because basically so you mentioned Montessori, and
Yeah.
I think that sort of like begins to open the door for basically how does the fractal curriculum work? You know, like or
Right.
your specific subset of it, that is
Yes.
the engineering side of it.
Yeah.
And maybe we do that. Maybe let's talk about like the course that you've built, and then a bit more about the fractal ethos a little bit.
Right.
Because
So.
that also blends into the idea of teapot and community and growth, and I
Mhm.
want to get to those themes later.
So my philosophy is totally incomplete. I'm young. I'm at the beginning of my career, and I'm gonna make a lot of mistakes and get better. So caveat there. But you have to have a philosophy. So my teaching philosophy is there is alpha for the financial trading term. There is
You're clearly
unexpected
based in New
gains.
York.
Yeah, unexpected gains to be made from focusing on culture as the means of transmitting knowledge rather than lesson or curriculum or teaching or whatever. And most people are not focused on this at all. And if you focus on it just 20% better than other people, like that's a big improvement. But for us, I focus on it almost entirely, partially because I'm lazy. It's like, well, I don't want to be responsible for teaching everybody to code. Like, I would much prefer it if I could just invite people over to my house, and by living in my house, they just learn to code by magic. That would be the ideal, right? Now, that's not quite possible, but how can we get as close to that dream as we can? And we know that it should theoretically be possible because this is precisely what immersion learners do when they move to another country and don't speak any other language. What are you going to do? Are you just going to sit around and not know how to speak English and you live in America? Like, no, you're going to learn. Even if it's very uncomfortable to you, even if you're awkward, you're going to learn. And we also see this in children. So obviously, like my daughter is learning to live and be in existence right now. And she is just going to learn all my mannerisms. She's going to learn how I talk, and she's going to learn how I walk, and she's going to learn like how we do the dishes in our house and how we eat and how we hold our cutlery. And to some extent, there's going to be a little bit of prompting here and there, but for the most part, I don't really have any interest in teaching her how to do these things. Like I would want her to learn, but she's just going to learn on her own, which is the kind of crazy thing. And what I need to do is create the environment where it's natural, right? So an environment where lots of books get read is an environment where people learn to read. Although phonics is real, by the way, we're going to do phonics, so that's another thing to talk about. Um, and by the way, that's an interesting phonics is such an interesting one because it's kind of at the edge of this philosophy. It's like you can get 90% better at teaching a society to read by being a literate culture, a culture where everyone reads and books are common and signs are everywhere, because no kid wants to be the kid who can't read the sign. That is really like you're just left out of society. It's not even about you being bullied or something like that. You know, people, it's just you want to be able to read the sign. I'm literally wearing a shirt that has characters on it. Like my daughter sees me wear shirts with characters on them every day. English characters. She's gonna be like, "What is that?" You know. Um, but however, at the edge of that is phonics, which is like okay, but also uh, the last 10% is that there's a best way to learn to read, and the best way is that you have to learn all of the phonemes in the English language. And I try my best to look out for that in my curriculum too. But similarly, it's like if you're taking a class that I teach, regardless of whether it's computer science or it's Montessori or whatever it is, what I'm going to focus on is like how can I create the most productive environment that is feasibly possible given my budget and my resources and the people I have access to, and how am I going to enforce cultural norms in that space and create an etiquette and create a sense of grace where people are practicing all the skills they need merely by living in that space every day that they need to succeed in that discipline. So in computer science, it's actually relatively simple. What do we do? How do we make sure that everyone here becomes a good computer scientist? Well, first of all, the most impressive and high status thing in this community is to ship code. There's nothing that will get you more praise. There is nothing that will get you more attention. There's nothing that will get more celebration than shipping code. It is the most high status thing in the space by far. No amount of talking about code or telling or like impressing, it's going to be about shipping code. Secondly, everyone is here at 9 o'clock every day. So we come in early and we're in the space. So there is a sense of courtesy, right? We're paying each other the courtesy and taking ourselves seriously of being here every day. We do roundups at the end of every day. I don't think that that's necessarily important, except the fact that it's kind of team building. I actually think it's like we take a little bit of too much time to do it, and it's kind of a distraction. But we have dedicated monitors in the space. So, and in the beginning, when I'm teaching people to code, I'm like, hey, man, you're not using a monitor. You have to use a second monitor. And that seems like a small thing, right? But actually, using a second monitor makes you substantially more productive. And the second thing that it tells them and what it says about the culture is like, I really care about your productivity. I really care about you shipping more code than you would in a counterfactual world. And so even though you might not like using a second monitor or you might not be used to it, I'm going to push you outside of your comfort zone in order to be more productive in the space. That's kind of interesting. And then we do have some cultural norms about how much you publish every day and deploying things to the public. So all these things kind of stack up. And then there's a channel where every day you post, every time you submit a PR, you post in the channel and then you get like a little ding. And all of this kind of adds up to people kind of like self-enforcing, you know, which is really nice. It's a little bit hard with computer science. Like what I would, in my dream world, people would be like spinning wheels and like turning levers and making gadgets, and they'd be like soldering and connecting Rube Goldberg type machines together. And like that would be teaching them computer science, because I think the best environment, the best culture is one that's like very physical. Like basically I want to be able to tap into the monkey part of us as much as I can. Because the more I can do that and connect that with the good, like connect the monkey part with the beautiful truth seeking, like this is computer science part, the more I can get people to learn merely by having fun. Computer science is a little bit hard because everyone has to be on their own computers right now. But we try our best to fix that with a few different, systems like pair programming and group projects and stuff like that. Although that's far from perfect. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's like roughly how I
sort of. I mean, I wanted to get a sense for the kinds of problems that you give them and how they change over the course of the 12 weeks. So like, what do you start with that because the delta is huge between somebody with zero knowledge and somebody with 12 weeks of experience.
Yeah. It's worth noting that if I get somebody with zero knowledge, I would not let them enroll in the program. If I get somebody with zero knowledge, I give them a pre-course material set, which is like a bunch of really, really good online resources that are fantastic. And I say, hey, you're welcome to come into the space and study these things. But like, I'm not letting you into the program until I know you're serious, until I know that you like really are going to finish this thing. Because I don't want to. One of the ways I could disrespect all the students and their time is by accepting a student who doesn't take it as seriously, or accepting a student who is not capable of putting in the sort of let's say
doesn't have the prereqs.
Exactly, you don't have the prereqs. If you're stuck, it's no fun for anyone. So anyway, that's one thing that's worth noting. But we take people from like, you can solve FizzBuzz and you can create a React app, to you can get a job that's worth 6 figures. So that is a huge delta, definitely. What it looks like is actually a race, in my opinion. Like, it's not so much the scope and sequence of things that we teach. I almost wish it were a little bit better, but I can literally read. Let me just read from the program right now, because that is going to be better than me saying this off the top of my head. So basically in the first week, we have people do the full stack in the first week. I really don't believe in I don't believe in like this front end and then back end and then put it together thing. It's like you got to go full stack. We start with Git and getting a personal site up and running
Perfect.
on Netlify. So basically, you do like a front end React app, you put it on Vercel or you put it on Netlify, and you like get all the Git stuff going. And like that needs to happen first. And then
Yeah.
immediately we add an Express.js backend to that as soon as you're done. Then we start calling the Express.js backend in order to get data. Then immediately we add a Postgres database to that. And we use Docker to spin that up locally. And there's no problem with that. It's not so complicated. And then Supabase. And then we basically have this full stack CRUD app. And that is happening for many people within the first 2 days or so. And then we cover styling. So by the end of the first week, the goal is you are able to build a beautiful CRUD app that is full stack. We sometimes use like a calculator where you have to send the post requests over the field. I don't like that example, actually. I prefer to make apps that are kind of meaty in the sense that a student at their level would like enjoy using it. And the calculator, I feel like, is a little bit contrived, but it's not easy to come up with the perfect curriculum.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike, I think.
Yeah. And then we add authentication oftentimes in the first week, but if we don't get to it, then authentication goes into the second week. Which again, people overcomplicate. It's like, if you already know how to code, you can understand the idea of passing a token in cookie headers and then reading the token from the cookie and then sending back like 401
code
or whatever, sending back different codes depending on what the thing is in the cookie. But I think a lot of people wait too long to teach these kind of basic things. And then we go straight into game development, actually. So as soon as you know the full stack,
there's an interesting part.
We're going as quickly as we can into game development because it's really satisfying. The backend really matters. Why does the backend matter? Like a lot of times with these apps these toy apps, the backend doesn't matter. It's empty. It exists just to store some data that you could have just stored on the client anyway because you have no users. So the whole thing is useless. But why do you need a backend if you're building a game? Well, because it's multiplayer. We don't do single player games, we do multiplayer games. And so if you're not sending the data to your backend server, how are you going to stream it over WebSockets to all of your clients or whatever? We actually do polling initially rather than WebSockets, but we use tic-tac-toe as the kind of classic, easy, good example. The other thing about tic-tac-toe that's awesome is view as a function of state. That is a thing that I'm trying to drill into people as early as possible. It's like, you have to get this functional programming mindset where you're saying like, I am not modifying my game state. I'm never modifying my game state. I am merely creating a new game state. I'm going to update the game state with a new game state, all pure functions, and then I'm going to re-render my view given the new state. And people are like a little bit confused by this. Why don't I just go in and put the X into the div? I was like, because it doesn't scale at all to a team of people that are developing this application together. And then they're like, but isn't it inefficient? And it's like, no, it's efficient because you develop faster. And your tic-tac-toe app is never going to run less than 60 frames per second. Like, you have no problems here. So
I have to I'll pitch in for my favorite documentation of all time, which is like the canonical gospel of this stuff. It's called Reframe, Frame by a guy called Day 8. It is Clojure, so I don't know how you feel about
oh wow, this is a purple link. So I've used this before. Oh yeah. I've used this when I was learning Clojure.
There you go. See, I knew you were a good person. I think that piece of writing, I think that's the canonical example of why the React innovation was so important, but also when paired with functional programming, and having like a mono state philosophy that then triggers a re-rendering of only the things that changed. It's just the right way to think about it. If you think about any other different way, you're gonna have a bad time. And I think it's huge that you get to all of that. And I think tic-tac-toe is a perfect example of simple, but the kind of like non-trivial graphics rendering.
No, it's not trivial. Yeah, you need lobbies, you need players.
Yeah. No, I think it's awesome. And to get to that level in 2 weeks we're off to a rockin' start.
And I think one of the ways we get there is we just don't go through these stupid steps. Like, there's tons of people who are teaching like tic-tac-toe, but you use JavaScript to put the X in the div. And it's like, just don't teach it. You don't need to do that ever. And I get that sometimes maybe you'll be working in a weird code base, but we can get back to that after week 12.
Yeah.
I don't need to teach you the bad things so that you can learn the good thing later.
No, I think that's awesome. And then, okay, now I'm kind of, maybe this is overreaching, but how much do you get into things like CICD stuff
Yeah,
for
so we do cover CICD. So that comes literally in the next week. We do like Storybook, for instance. And so we add V-test, Storybook, we add a bunch of smoke testing, like end-to-end testing with Cypress, that sort of thing. We also cover scripting. So just like using TypeScript to seed your databases, using TypeScript to like go run a cron, that sort of thing. And we also do that in Python and Go as well. And then the other thing that we add in week 3 is we have everyone. This is one of my favorite units, and people love it. So I go through and I grade my units now every semester, so I can go change them all.
improve?
I only want 9 out of 10 units or better. And one of the 9 out of 10 units was scripting. So it was like the scripting unit where we would have people write Bash scripts and Go scripts, whatever language, mostly those 2 languages, in order to spin up project templates. So it would like run all the like Docker compose up, and it would make their Docker schema file for them, and it would make their TS config, and it would create the VDAP and add the Express.js backend and add authentication and add, so because we already got to the full stack in week 2, in week 3, we can automate building a full stack app our way, the way that we like, with all of our own tools. And this gives students like this really cool feeling of like, oh, I get to use software to automate. Yeah, I get to use software to automate something that takes me like 15 minutes every time, which that's really, really fun. And then...
And when is the scripting week? Is it right after the...
That's week 3.
That's week 3. All right. Yeah. So far, no notes.
Yep. Week 4, we do algorithms, finally. So we covered it in tic-tac-toe, by the way, because you have to do algorithms if you want to know who's going to win. Calculating victory condition is a small algorithms problem. But we're covering it in severity now with sorting and searching and all that stuff. And instead of the typical like, solve the code problem, you have to view as a function of state, keep track or use callbacks to update the state of a visual representation of your sorted array or list or whatever. So imagine I have 100 unsorted elements and I want a sorting algorithm. Every element is going to correspond to a bar in a bar graph, obviously. And that state, which is the array, the current sorted state of the array, is going to be rendered. And then when that state is updated, I'm going to add a small delay, and then it's going to re-render, and then I'm going to perform another step of my sort. It's going to re-render. I'm going to perform another step of my sort. It's going to re-render. And so then I can directly compare these different sorting algorithms side by side in React. And this is both a good exploration of React, good recycling of view as a function of state, and also there are ways to trip up here. So if you get too and you have to use useEffect also in a good way to create an infinite loop, which is nice. I think people can get stuck in really useful ways here when they're trying to render every state. Like they get the sorted output and then they like update it to the sorted output. So it's just a 2-step animation. You just have like the pre-sorted and the unsorted. And then they're like, wait, but how do I get every intermediate step? That's a good question. You shouldn't have just put that in that, you got to think about it. I often recommend callbacks, by the way, if you're listening around and you're like, how should you do that? And oh man, we're only on week 4. We do 3D generative art. We do some music coding. We do, really like the theme here is there's a lot of things that are interesting engineering problems, but also just like fucking cool. And then by now, which is they unlocked AI. So the first 4 weeks, all the things I've described so far, no
vanilla,
AI tooling, vanilla, because I'm mostly teaching you how to think. The rest of the program is actually you use AI, and I'm teaching you to ship as fast as you can. Like you go off. I trust you at this point. And then, honestly, the whole program falls apart after that in a good way because almost everyone has an internship at a company in New York by that point.
Oh, I see.
Week 7. I'm starting to give everyone internships. So the rest of the program is basically capstones and internships. We start our first capstone in week 8, and then week 8, week 9, week 10, week 11, and week 12 are all capstone projects. Week 8 is a capstone, week 9 is a capstone, week 10 is a capstone. Week 11 and 12 are combined. That's like one final big 2-week capstone.
Yeah.
And then that's how we do the program.
Well, that sounds fantastic. And there was another layer there that I wanted to unpack with you, which is when we connected, I don't know, I guess it must have been like 6 months ago or so, and now can't tell. There was a moment that I really appreciated in that conversation when I was asking you, so how did you do it? How did you set up the website? I don't know. I was just trying to get a bit more insight into how you decided to go from 0 to 1 with this teaching community that you're building. And you said something along the lines of, "Did you know you could just do it?" It doesn't even. Oh, there was a thing that you said where I was like, oh, I guess basically all you need is a website, and you were like, you don't even need a website. It's a Notion page, and I was like, wow, okay. So there's and it's cool to see that bleed into the curriculum itself, which I think is like a sink for more like solidified best practices of thinking and stuff. But for the broader reach of Fractal, how does that philosophy, let's call it, the very like bootstrappy agile approach to building a community at times maybe flying in the face of previously required notions of formality. How has that sort of affected? Let's talk about that a little bit. What's your angle on it, and what's the rest of the Fractal syllabus look like?
There's a lot to get into now. Like, we could spend many, many, many hours talking about just like community moderation specifically. So I think something I want to point out is one of the ways that you can afford to move fast is if you are very flexible. There's a funny thing here about railroads, actually, which is a good analogy that I tend to like. If you hammer all your railroads into place exactly with railroad spikes, and they have no give at all, the small curves and wiggles that happen due to I don't even know, it's like tectonic plate movement or something, like will break the railroads, and then you have a problem, like your train's gonna run off the tracks. I'm getting this slightly wrong, but it's like, if you look at the way railroads are built, they're built kind of to like wiggle just a little bit, not very much, but they need to be able to wiggle just a little bit. If they wiggle too much, obviously that's bad too. And it's like, I think there's kind of a beautiful analogy here in a lot of cases, which is if you try to be too rigid, you actually break. So that doesn't work. And on the other hand, you can't be too loose, obviously, because then you don't have anything at all. What I really mean to say is I'm afforded the opportunity to take all these cool, to make all these cool opportunities because I have some breathing room, I have some wiggle room, I have some security, I have a safety net. So another analogy I like is like social fabric, which I imagine is like a weave of all my relationships in society. And I sometimes imagine that like the social net, like I'm like climbing up a mountain cliff or something, and the social net is like, my social net is underneath me somewhere in the canyon, and I'll literally fall through it and die if I don't have one, if I take a big risk. But if I take a big risk and I do have one, everything's okay. So um, it's easy to just do things when somebody like my wife is my partner in everything, because she is such a flexible and creative thinker. Anytime there's a problem, it feels like she's right by my side, creatively brainstorming. Anytime I can't achieve something, like I overshot and bit off more than I could chew, she's there like chewing it with me and getting through it. And um, and it feels that way with a lot of my friends. So I just want to point out that there's an illusion, I guess, that you can just kind of wing it and everything's going to be okay. And it is very easy to just wing it and know that everything is going to be okay when the people around you like help you get through the mistakes. You know, you want to be able to eat the mistakes. If the mistake kills you, then you should not be winging it. Definitely. Anyway, all that caveat aside, why wing it and kind of what's going on with winging it and how do we do this? I mean, it really is as simple, and the philosophy really is as simple as like anything that you can afford to do that you want to do, you should just do right now. And you shouldn't wait. You shouldn't do it later, and you shouldn't like put it off because you're going to learn so much by trying to do it. And as long as you're reasonably public and you're reasonably strategic, you can't throw strategy out the window and you can't throw talking about what you're working on out the window, but you're gonna gain points, skill points from you're gonna get XP points or whatever, however you want to think about it. Like when I do something and fail in public, people don't see me as a failure. They see me as somebody who does things. Now, some people might see me as a failure, for instance, in the case that I fail. But mostly my failures are silent. So a good example is hosting dinner parties. We just hosted dinner parties for 52 weeks or whatever in a row. Sometimes people are like, how do you just host a dinner party? Sounds like a simple question, but it's scary, right? We've hosted, I don't know, at least 3 or 4 dinner parties where nobody showed up at all. And that's really embarrassing.
That
That
sucks,
feels
man. I'm
pretty bad.
sorry. Yeah.
But when you move to a new city and you're hosting a dinner party for the first time and nobody shows up, it's like, yeah, this sucks. And also, it would be a shame if I gave up. And the other thing that's worth noting is like you might think, oh, people noticed that nobody showed up, but nobody noticed that nobody showed up to my dinner party at all. I got recognition for being the guy who hosts dinner parties. So after hosting the dinner party and nobody shows up, the next time I host it, people do, 3 or 4 times. It's like across different types of events or whatever. But it's like if you're hosting an event series and nobody shows up to the first one in the event series, that is in some ways a sign that it's not popular, definitely. And also, you still gain the notoriety for being the person who is hosting the event series. So eventually it was kind of like, oh, renowned Fractal Sunday dinners. Like, have you heard about this? Everyone knows about it. And everyone who comes into New York is from Teapot is like visiting this party or whatever. But from my perspective, it was just the same dinner. I just kept hosting the same dinner every Sunday. And new people kept showing up because I don't know, apparently like word spreads that you do stuff. So I don't know. That's why I think it's like you're just going to learn a lot by doing the thing. Nobody's going to judge you for failing. In fact, people are mostly going to notice the fact that you're doing the thing. And if you don't give up, you will like often be an expert before you know it. Like a lot of people come to me asking me how to host events. That's really funny in my opinion. I am a very, very like bad is not the right word because I'm clearly a good host by definition, I guess. But I am like a very lazy host. So I'm definitely not a person who like is hyper masterful about the craft of my events. I just did it because I felt like it. But you end up in this class of people very quickly who actually stuck through the thing.
And let's talk about how that drive has manifested into Fractal itself, like the other, because you
Yeah.
got people. I remember when we talked about it, you're
Yeah.
getting other people to teach under the Fractal brand.
Yeah,
And
we have maybe over 40 different teachers who've taught courses through Fractal University or something. Okay, this is a great question. So this is a little bit like Visa's thing of the domino meme and finding the. Do you know what Visa?
yeah, VisaCon.
Yeah, of course. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So yeah, VisaCon V has this domino meme idea of if we create these nourishing communities filled with like love and kindness and generosity, curiosity for ideas, then you kind of find the other people because they're naturally drawn to that thing. And then that creates a meta scene because not every community can grow forever. And in fact, it doesn't want to. It's like not comfortable for communities to grow forever. So instead, you kind of break out into multiple different sub communities, but are part of some meta scene that's still fundamentally about curiosity. They like all the communities like each other generally. And then that can lead to a whole society, being filled with kind of this curiosity and intense desire to support each other. And that can lead to kind of a golden age, as in his meme. So there really is something like that where it's just kind of you find the other people. So I know, it's like if you were in New York, you're not in New York, right?
No, I'm in SF.
Okay.
I have a
If you were
long
in New York,
overdue New York trip. Yeah.
right? If you were in New York, I'd just be like, hey, you want to host a class on, there's a bunch of instruments behind you, maybe music jamming class, like that'd be kind of cool. And you just kind of know the people who can hold that space well because they find you or you find them or whatever. And then really it's just about kind of showing them, hey, you can just do this. It's not going to take us very long. Oftentimes I'll pull out a template. When I meet somebody who I think should teach a class, I'll often pull out the document for the class syllabus right there on my laptop. And I'll be like, oh, let's just fill this out really fast. We should fill out the whole
Mm-hmm.
syllabus based on their expert. Like, people are
Mm-hmm.
experts in something. Everyone's an expert in something.
Mm-hmm.
And, you'd be surprised at the sort of classes that are cool. Like, a cool class would be like, how to find a good thing to watch on Netflix. Actually, would be an interesting class. A lot of people are very bad at this. There's probably some like
Mm.
lazy person who thinks they're good for nothing, who's extremely good at finding a very good show at Netflix. And if you can just draw that out of them, anyway, that's a tangent. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'll just fill out the syllabus with people right there, and then I'll just list the class right away. And I'll be like, hey, like I'll tell you if people sign up. And then 12 people sign up, and I send the people over, and class starts, and I text them a few months later, and I'm like, how'd it go?
I mean, I think the ethos is really wonderful, and I think that like it reminds me a little bit of those like parody movies from the early 2000s, like where it's like pretend college, but it's actual real life
Yeah,
valuable college. Um, and and I do think that like, yeah, I think in broader terms, like I mean, I think we're still catching up to the like mobile phone revolution, like, or the
yeah,
sure,
yeah.
or like the mobile
We're
internet.
catching up to the internet.
Yeah, we're catching up to the internet, and then like with AI, I think like the parameters for social accreditation are going to be so widely different. And with
Yeah,
trends being what they are, with college being so expensive, like I think
yeah,
that there's going to be a much more, let's say, market oriented approach to upscaling your own skill set. And I think you're doing the awesome work of being at the forefront of that. Okay,
yeah.
before we
Sorry,
finish
go ahead.
with, I just wanted to touch on one more final thing, which I think like rounds the fractal approach to teaching, which you mentioned Montessori. So I wanted to hear a bit more because Montessori is, I love Montessori. Wasn't fortunate enough to go to a Montessori school, but I also
Yeah, me
know
either.
that there you well, the fact that a lot of higher level, or I don't know, higher level, higher learning institutions, or even high schools, like the number of Montessori method institutions drops off exponentially the farther into education you get. So I was wondering if you had thoughts about that, and also how you
Yeah.
incorporate Montessori into the learning.
Okay, so I'm just inspired by her. Is like what I'll
Mm.
say, and the reason it drops off is actually fairly straightforward. She did not write guides or herself run
Mm.
schools that taught older students. Um, so she like theorized. I don't remember if she ever got around to running a farm school. Um, I'm I'm blanking on that at the moment. But she basically only got up to 14 years old, and after that, it's kind of like a blank on and you might
Mhm.
even say in her philosophy that at that point you should just be contributing to your society. Like you should graduate straight into being a contributing member. But why am I inspired by her and how am I inspired is like she just got results, man. Like she did the thing. Sometimes you see people and you look at their results and you're like, "Oh, you're the goat." Like, of course I should be inspired by you. If you aren't inspired by Michael Jordan, you just haven't read about him. Like
Mhm.
you should just maybe read a biography or like maybe you should watch that Netflix documentary on Michael Jordan cuz
That's pretty good.
he's the best. He's the greatest of all time. And so you should know about that. You should know about the greatest of all time people. Montessori, I think, is a little bit similar. Like she taught slum kids to teach, or she taught slum kids to read and write at ages that her society thought was physically impossible to learn the skills of reading and writing. She invented child furniture for toddlers. She invented child-sized tools for toddlers. She like invented a lot. So much of what she built is embedded in our existing curriculums that we think other people made it, and it must be natural. Like math manipulables, counting beads. A lot of classrooms have counting beads. That's a Montessori material. a lot of classrooms have sandpaper cards. That's a Montessori material. Just a huge amount of what has become mainstream methodology for teaching came from her. She just invented it because she was like, oh, how should we teach a kid to read? And um, she writes so much about her philosophy that is very inspiring to me. It's like her philosophy is very much about how do we break down a skill into sub skills and then embed those sub skills in the environment. And then as you complete these environmental increasing challenges, you are naturally inculcated into the skill, and you'll find it very easy.
And how, well, I guess it kind of is self-evident with everything you've said before about how that manifests into the fractal methodology, or
Yeah,
at
and,
least
and,
in the
and it's
computer
different for
science.
every person. Like the community college, for instance, or Fractal University, which is the program. Community college is so funny. It's like I don't know what to call it. It's a literal community college, but it's not like a state college. Um, but that program, it's not like everyone is inspired by Montessori. I try my best to give advice to people that is inspired by my teaching philosophy when I give them advice. But again, this is caveated by the same caveat I gave earlier, which is like I'm young, I'm at the beginning of my career, I'm going to get a lot of things wrong, um, and and also like people come with different expertise and different ways of connecting with people. So it's not like every class that you can take is necessarily through that philosophy, but when everything I teach definitely is very focused on culture.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think this is also a pretty good segue to bring up my last little note for the day, which is it's a thing that's also very topical in my friend group now. A lot of my friends are starting to become parents or like early
Right.
days
Yes.
parenting, and it is the next chapter. I mean, still TBD when the timing is going to be, but it's certainly the next chapter in my life. So how has the experience of parenting affected you, man? Like how has that like world shaking, rocking, piece of
I find
news and now bundle of joy uh affected you?
I have worse recall and I consistently have like a minor feeling of exhaustion at all times. Those are like the negatives, and then the positives are like my entire value system, worldview, love for my life, motivation, desire to live, desire to be great, desire to like, um, I guess like enjoy has been overwhelmed. You know, the she's just delight. She's a delight. She's so wonderful. Um, I it's so funny. Like once you're a parent, you don't know how to talk about it. You only know these cliches, and um, I guess somebody should teach a class about like how to write poetry about your child or something. That'd be a good Fractal U class. Maybe I should teach that. But there's there's really nothing like it. One of the reasons this is gonna sound fucking crazy, by the way, but it's true. It's like one of the reasons I was convinced to have kids when I did. I'm pretty young. I'm 26, and so some people are like, "Oh, that's early to have kids," and historically, no, but in our society, it's kind of early. Um, but uh, people are like, "Why?" I figured it would make me a better man. I just had a good I had a hypothesis. I'd seen a bunch of other people in my life become fathers and it made them all better men, and I was like, they did it. I was very lucky to have a COO at the first startup that I worked at who was like like if I could be hit that good at operations, I would do anything. Like he's so good, and he had two little girls, two daughters, and his wife was in residency
Oh my
in med school.
gosh. Oh,
and
that.
and he was the COO of a early stage startup. There were four of us. It was a 4-person team. It's just like, and he was raising from investor, just an insane guy. So Jeff, if you ever listen to this, I love you, man. We should catch up. But uh, that really convinced me, and he was delight. He was a delight to work with. I don't know if he ever blew up on me. I don't know if he ever got grumpy. Like he really never let it slip. That the exhaustion that he must have felt all the time. Um, But I kind of figured, okay, if that's what happened to Jeff when he had kids, then, you know, maybe that I want to be like that. Uh, and I do think it's making me like that. I find more motivation to go to the gym. than I've ever had. I find more motivation to show up at work than I've ever had. I find more, it's not like I was lacking motivation before. And I think if you really are like lacking motivation and desire to live or whatever, it's not like your kid is going to give that to you. It's a lot of work. You have to be ready for that. But also, it feels like all she does is give back in terms of, kind of like life force, which is really delightful. And seeing her grow up is crazy. She learns so fast. She grows so fast. You blink and you miss it is definitely true. I don't know if there's anything in specific that you want to know though, like raising a kid in
No,
community or
no, no.
how
It's
I think about
mostly
teaching
like
her.
I think that's a great answer. I mean, like um, I guess sort of I've been in a 2 year sort of like existential bit, and sort of like not in a bad way at all, like in a very good way, like trying to find my voice and my role as a creative, as an
Yeah,
engineer, as a um and seeing comparing life stories with my peer group, and mentors who are a few years ahead and people who are a few years below, and sort of trying to understand and harmonize with all that, and it seems to be a note in the current melody that is being played by the universe, uh is thinking about that stuff.
yeah,
And it's been very inspiring and beautiful. I mean, like, it really has been virtually unanimously positive, to hear people talk about it. It also gets people thinking about, it's very existential, your role and
yeah.
the meaning of your
Right.
story, and
Yeah, it's
like,
definitely not about me anymore. She's like so much more important than me.
yeah,
It's crazy. And uh, but that's so wonderful, like
yeah.
uh for somebody who took the weight of the world on my shoulders for a long time, and I still do, to be clear. Like
Oh, yeah.
my mission now is to build the best society I possibly can for my daughter. So there's a real sense in which I don't think money is what she needs. Um, so it's not trying to make the most money for her. Like what she needs is like political stability. What she needs is a
Mhm.
great city. She needs more housing. She needs more transportation. She needs like Star Trek fucking matter converters.
Mhm.
She needs spaceships. And we have to build all that for her and for her generation. And anyway, so it's not like my ambition has gone away, but what I mean is, um, I don't need to take responsibility for everything anymore. I just need to take responsibility for my wife and my daughter and my friends and like all the
Mhm.
things that impact them, which is ultimately
Mhm.
everything. It's still all connected, but also it feels so much more grounded. It's like the reason I do it is because every day I wake up and she's there next to me and I get to look at her and pick her up and I don't know. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I think also there's a particular thing about our zeitgeist, that is that I think parenting has been robbed of its glory a little bit. Like
Mm,
in the Hollywood spheres, like in the mainstream media spheres, like there's almost like this projection from the Matrix to us, that your career is everything, and that like, I don't know. And I think that there's a reclaiming of the values of um parenting and even personal responsibility, that I think is like, people was promoted to be a burden, but it really is a very freeing thing. I think, like, it just like, oh my
totally.
gosh,
Yeah,
all the
totally freeing.
existential stuff that I have to figure out
Mhm.
my meaning. I don't need to figure out about my meaning. That's
Yeah.
their problem now.
Yeah, also like you don't have time to figure out your meaning. Like this is not even on the top 10 list of the things you're concerned about. It's like, okay, like she wants me to play with her all the time. Like at it people just don't get it who don't have kids, man. It's crazy. Like my priority list is like number 1, play with my daughter all day, and I can't do that because I need to make money. So
Mhm.
like substituted in as like a sub bullet of play with my daughter every
Mhm.
day is like make enough money to play with my daughter every day or
Mhm.
whatever, which I know there's cliches about this in Hollywood that actually are matter and stuff, but in the real world you do have to kind of balance. um and and then I'm kind of like, okay, I'm not going to worry about the existential meaning of my life. Like the meaning of my life is get back to bullet point 1. Like finish all the
Mhm.
shit on my task list so I can play with my daughter, because everything else is just me like bleeding time that I have with her, and that is stupid. I shouldn't do that.
I think that's a great way to end it, Andrew. Thank you so much for the time, man. This was great.
Yeah,
I'm glad we got to reconnect, and I hope to have you many times over the course of our careers and your daughter's life.
I hope so too. It's been awesome to come back on the show.